Tom Harwod, that doyen of GB News, one of the people in GB News who I must say I think is the most professional and by far the most agreeable and a thoughtful individual. Though sometimes I despair. But anyway, he seized on Rachel Millward's predicament with the delight of someone who believes he's finally located the pressure point in Green Party morality. For years, he argues, she and her colleagues have pressed the country to welcome more asylum seekers, yet when the Home Office selected her a site in her own district, she objected. He calls it hypocrisy, she calls it mismanagement. The truth is more complicated and frankly far more revealing about both the decay of the asylum system and the intellectual laziness of the attack. What Millward is confronting is not the presence of asylum seekers at all, but the government's habit of scattering large numbers of highly vulnerable men into remote and unsuitable facilities under the banner of decisive action. The site in question is an army camp on the edge of a small rural town, 600 men, many traumatised by war and persecution, placed in a military environment that is isolated, poorly served by transport and unable to offer civic or psychological support. The council fears community safety. It also fears the welfare consequences for the men themselves. One can caricature that as NIMBYism, or one can recognise that the housing of these people in military camps is intrinsically degrading, logistically incoherent and socially corrosive. Harwod prefers the caricature. It is easier to accuse the Greens of double standards than to interrogate the Home Office's failures. Millward's central point is consistent. She supports asylum seekers, but not the reckless dumping of hundreds of them in a setting designed for soldiers rather than civilians. This is not NIMBYism, it is realism. Even the army would not house its own personnel in these conditions without protest, and yet these men who have endured war, persecution and flight are somehow expected to fare better. The deeper issue is a broken asylum system that has been patched with increasingly desperate measures. Ministers trumpet the end of hotels, but the alternative, vast institutional camps, creates new tensions, new costs, new risks, and the government itself admits it is furious at the number of asylum hotels, but fury is not a policy. A functioning asylum system requires processing, resettlement, legal clarity and integration. Instead, the Home Office is operating by leak, rumour and panic and can't be bothered to actually do the work it's expected to do, confirming plans only after they have escaped into public domain and even then refusing to consult. Millward was not informed. The district were kept in the dark. Residents were left to speculate. That is not local failure. That is Whitehall negligence. The irony, of course, is that Harwod's attack strengthens the Green Councillor's case rather than weakens it. If her position were truly hypercritical, she would object to asylum seekers everywhere, but she doesn't. She objects to the placement of 600 traumatised men in a remote barracks without infrastructure, oversight or community preparation. She's not rejecting asylum seekers, she's rejecting a model of warehousing human beings. Even the legal dimension exposes the scale of the problem, because the site sits on Crown land, normal planning protections don't apply. The council may seek a judicial review, but that is costly, uncertain and directed at process rather than substance. It underlines how little control local authorities have over decisions that will reshape their communities. It exposes the constitutional imbalance inherent in the Crown land exemption, and it raises the question Harwod didn't ask: is it really democratic to impose a high-impact policy on a town without warning, consultation or accountability? Harwod's criticism also overlooks the community's own mixed feelings. Some residents call for compassion, others worry about strain on services, most simply want to understand what is being proposed. They cannot understand because the Home Office will not explain. The Home Office is uncontactable and unaccountable. Millward is left filling the vacuum created by that silence, and she is punished for trying. There is political opportunism here, but it's not Millward's. It is the government's willingness to use rural towns as policy shock absorbers. It is the media's impulse to turn genuine local anxieties into national culture war trophies. It is the refusal to admit that hotel closures are only meaningful if what replaces them is humane, safe and properly planned. Millward's critics claim she has changed her tune. In fact, her tune is the only one that remains consistent. Asylum seekers deserve protection, dignity and competent administration. What has changed is the setting. When the flaws of the system land on your doorstep, you see what they always were, not threats brought by refugees, but threats created by administrative failure. Tom Harwod wants to call that hypocrisy. It is, in truth, clarity. Tom, I would really like to take you to one side and have a proper talk, but I found your dealing with this particular subject fascinating, entertaining, in a way that I perhaps shouldn't have found it entertaining, because it's a very serious issue. Until the government fixes the asylum system, from processing to legal pathways to accommodation, the theatre will continue. Until the Home Office gets off its backside and starts to do real work, the theatre will continue. Councils will object, commentators will gloat, residents will worry, and asylum seekers will continue to be shunted between hotels, barracks and temporary camps, as if they were a logistical burden rather than human beings. In this sense, Tom Harwod is wrong about where the hypocrisy lies. The problem is not the Greens, the problem is the state as run by the Labour Party. A country that claims to value the rule of law and compassion should be able to house 1,200 people without descending into panic. The fact that it cannot is the final proof of Millward's point. The asylum system is not merely broken, it has become a symbol of administrative exhaustion, and the government's loudest defenders seem determined to blame everyone but the government itself. I am surprised that Tom Harwod stands up as a defender of this Labour government, given the channel that he works on and given the views that I believe he professes. But there we are. That's how the cookie crumbles. I was, as I say, amused by Tom, not for the first time, and I think he's wrong, but this is a gentle reproach.